The rain over Brooklyn fell like a curtain of silver threads, heavy and endless, soaking the sidewalks and blurring the glow of neon shop signs. Julian Gomez stood beneath the failing shelter of a battered umbrella, its ribs twisted from too many storms, its fabric sagging like a defeated flag. She pressed the tip into the pavement, her other hand clutching a bag that felt heavier by the second. She was late. And not just late, the late that threatened to unravel everything. Today was the first day of her new contract at Harris Global, the sprawling empire that had the city whispering ever since its enigmatic CEO returned from London. A presentation was scheduled that morning. A new leader was about to set the tone for the company's entire future. If absent and failed to show her face, she could lose the opportunity before it even began. Her phone had betrayed her at the worst possible moment. The screen had flickered, once blinked, then gone black, a single battery bar surrendering in the middle of her rideshare confirmation. Without a charger, without a backup, she was blind. Julian cursed under her breath, shoving the useless device deep into her bag. She scanned the street, desperately searching for any sign of a black car. The app said that your driver is on the way, a black sedan. And then, as though conjured by her desperation, it appeared. A sleek black car slowed at the red light in front of her. Its lines gleamed despite the rain, its tinted windows reflecting the smear of street lamps. Relief flooded her chest. She darted forward, yanking open the back door before hesitation could intervene. Finally, she gasped, sliding inside with rain dripping from her hair. "You're a lifesaver. I'm so late. Please go step on it." The door slammed shut behind her, muffling the roar of the storm. The man in the driver's seat turned his head slowly. He was not what she expected. Not a harried driver in a worn jacket. Not someone fiddling with the GPS while chewing gum. The man wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his shirt crisp white against his skin. His profile was striking: high cheekbones, clean-shaven jaw hair, brushed back with deliberate precision. And then there were his eyes, pale gray, steady, and unreadable. "Excuse me," he began, his voice deep calm. But Julian was already speaking, words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "No excuses, I know. Traffic's terrible, GPS is a nightmare, and rain worsens everything. But today of all days, not possible. Just head straight then, right after the little French cafe. Do you know they charge $12 for a donut there?" 12. I ate one yesterday and I'm still recovering from the guilt. Who even spends $12 on fried dough? Me, apparently. A terrible decision. The man blinked. Once, slowly, Julian continued, nervous energy fueling every sentence. "And look at me. I didn't notice until this morning, but my socks don't match. One has tiny penguins in Santa hats. The other has tacos with smiling faces. Tacos. And now I'm about to meet the new CEO of Harris Global, looking like a child who got dressed in the dark." His lips twitched. Barely. Almost a smile, but not quite. Julian leaned back against the leather seat, letting out a shaky laugh. Her umbrella sagged across her knees, dripping onto the spotless carpet. "Thank you, really. You're quiet, but I like that, the mysterious type. If I were you, I'd write a book. Memoirs of a silent Uber driver, a bestseller." The man said nothing, but his eyes flickered toward her in the mirror. Julian grinned at the briefest acknowledgement. "See, you get it. And this car, wow. Way too nice for rideshare. Smells like leather and money. Sitting in here almost makes me feel rich. This is good, because my bank account still grieves over that donut." The car glided smoothly through the rain, silent, except for her voice. Julian adjusted her damp curls, catching sight of the looming Harris Global Tower ahead. Its glass walls rose into the clouds, glowing like a beacon through the storm. "Side entrance, please," she said quickly. Less chance of anyone noticing me like this. I should have hired a makeup artist, honestly. I didn't know working at Harris Global meant looking like you stepped out of Vogue every morning. The car slowed with precision, pulling up to the curb. Julian grabbed her bag, already half out the door. Seriously, thank you. 5 stars. The best review. All of it just as soon as I find a charger. Best Uber ever. She gave him one last grateful smile before running toward the building, rain soaking her heels. The man did not reply. His eyes were forward, his face calm, unreadable, as if the moment had meant nothing. But it had. Inside Harris Global, the air hummed with tension. Employees clustered in groups, whispering, straightening ties, and smoothing skirts. The conference room gleamed with polished wood and glass walls overlooking the storm outside. Julian slipped into the crowd, praying no one would notice the state of her hair socks or missing blouse button. She ducked her head, hoping invisibility was still an option. Julian, a colleague, hissed. You almost missed it, the CEO's about to arrive. Her stomach knotted. The doors swung open. Footsteps echoed across the floor, firm and deliberate. Conversations died instantly. And then he appeared. The same man. The same pale gray eyes. The same tailored suit. Her breath caught. The folder in her hands slipped to the floor, papers scattering with a soft thud. The stranger from the car stepped to the front of the room. This, the coordinator announced, voice trembling with excitement, is Mr. Owen Harris, our new CEO. Julian's world tilted. Owen's gaze swept the room, calm and commanding, until it landed on her. His lips curved slightly into a smirk that held both amusement and something sharper. I hope my arrival hasn't caught anyone off guard, Owen said smoothly, his voice carrying with ease. His eyes never left Julian, especially those who mistook me for their driver this morning. The room fell silent. A nervous laugh bubbled somewhere in the back, quickly smothered. Julian's face burned crimson. Every word she had spoken in the car replayed in her head. The donut, the socks, the memoirs of a silent Uber driver. Her chest tightened, and she wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. But Owen's gaze remained steady, amused, calculated, and maybe, just maybe, interested. And so begins the story of Julian Gomez and Owen Harris, an accidental meeting, a humiliating mistake, and a spark that refuses to be ignored. Sometimes the wrong car can take you exactly where you were meant to be. If you've ever had a day spiral out of control in the most unexpected way, share it in the comments, we'd love to know. And if you're curious about what happens next between Julian and the man she mistook for an Uber driver, make sure to like this video and follow the channel. Because trust me, this story has only just begun. When Owen Harris finished his opening remarks, the conference room seemed to exhale in collective relief. Applause filled the air, polite, yet charged with nerves. Employees exchanged glances, some whispering, some simply staring at him, as though he were a legend come to life. Julian, however, could barely move. She sat frozen in her chair, her folder of papers scattered across the carpet, her heart hammering with the dull panic of someone caught in the most humiliating spotlight. She thought of running, vanishing into the rain-soaked city streets and never looking back. But Owen's gaze lingered, his pale gray eyes locked on hers again, for one piercing second, steady, unreadable, almost playful. Then just as quickly, he turned away, continuing the presentation as though nothing had happened. It was worse than if he had confronted her outright. Julian bent down, fumbling to collect her papers. Her fingers shook the edges of the sheet, slipping through her grasp. Around her, the whisper of fabric and the shifting of chairs made the silence unbearable. By the time she sat upright again, her cheeks were burning, her pulse a wild tempo she couldn't control. She kept her head down until the meeting ended. The hours that followed dragged like lead. Every sound, the tapping of keyboards, The ringing of phones felt sharper than usual. Her stomach tightened each time she glanced toward the glass office at the end of the corridor. That was his space now. Owen Harris. The man whose car she had commandeered, whose patience she had tested with tales of overpriced donuts and mismatched socks. She told herself she was safe. He was a CEO, not a petty dictator. He surely had better things to do than humiliating her further. And yet just before noon her phone rang. Miss Gomez came with the calm voice of Owen's assistant, clipped and professional. "Mr. Harris would like to see you in his office." Her stomach plummeted. She rose slowly, her legs moving stiffly, like they no longer belonged to her. She could feel eyes following her through the open space of desks. Whispers trailed like shadows in her wake. At the door, she knocked once. "Come in," came the reply. The office was large, yet minimalist. Glass walls framed the skyline gray clouds still pressing low over Manhattan. A sleek desk shelves lined with books in perfect symmetry. A leather chair turned slightly toward the window. Owen stood near it, his posture straight, his hands tucked loosely into his pockets. For a long moment he said nothing. His gaze swept over her, calm, steady, unreadable. Julian swallowed hard. "Mr. Harris, about this morning." He lifted a hand. The gesture was subtle, but it silenced her instantly. "You thought I was your driver," he said evenly. "And in 10 minutes, you managed to instruct me, critique Manhattan traffic, evaluate French pastries, and confess your fashion choices." Her face flamed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know my phone died, and the car looked exactly like—" Again his hand lifted, cutting her off. "I am not interested in excuses, Miss Gomez." The words landed like ice, but then he added almost softly, "I am interested in observation." Julian blinked. "Observation? You notice things," Owen said, moving slowly toward the desk. "Details. Flaws. The kind of things most people overlook. It's unusual." He lowered himself into the chair, folding his hands on the polished wood. "Which is why you'll be helping me." She frowned, caught between disbelief and dread. "Helping you? How?" "Starting this afternoon," Owen replied. "You'll accompany the maintenance team through the 10th floor. Check everything: lighting, printers, coffee machines. Report back. I want to see how well your so-called observations translate when they matter." Julian stared at him, stunned. "You want me to supervise maintenance?" "That's correct. But I was hired for administrative support." "Not." His gray eyes lifted sharp and unwavering. "Are you refusing an assignment, Miss Gomez?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "No, sir." A flicker of amusement crossed his features, too quick to be certain. "Good. Dismissed." Julian turned to leave, her mind a storm. Of all the punishments she'd imagined, public embarrassment, a written warning, even dismissal, this had never crossed her mind. And yet, as she stepped back into the hallway, she wasn't sure if this was punishment. By late afternoon, Julian was standing in a storage closet on the 10th floor, surrounded by 2 weary maintenance workers, a roll of duct tape and a clipboard she had no idea how to use. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, jotting down notes about a flickering light fixture. "I have a degree. I should be at a desk, not crawling under ceilings." "Miss," one of the workers asked politely, "the printer in room B keeps jamming again." Julian sighed, tucking the clipboard under her arm. "Fine. Let's negotiate with the beast." Room B smelled faintly of paper and ink. The massive printer loomed like a stubborn giant. She crouched down, tugging at the tray with the determination of someone who had lost this battle too many times before. "Come on, cooperate," she whispered, smacking its side lightly. "Just 1 page. That's all I ask." The machine groaned in protest. Julian huffed. I swear if you spit toner at me, I'm suing. And that was when the voice came. Calm, deep, amused. Is this your usual negotiation technique, Miss Gomez? Her head jerked up so fast, she smacked it against the panel. Ow! She spun around, rubbing her scalp. Owen stood in the doorway watching her with that unreadable expression. Heat rose to her cheeks. I was just... He talked to the printer finished and stepped inside. Fascinating. Julian bit her lip, scrambling to salvage her dignity. It's a strategy. Intimidate first, then bargain. Works on machines. Sometimes. For a moment, silence stretched. Then, impossibly, the corner of Owen's mouth curved upward, a hint of a smile. Continue, he said before turning back toward the hall. And just like that, he was gone. Julian exhaled, her pulse racing. Had she imagined it? That flicker of humor, that nearly imperceptible crack in the mask of the stoic CEO. She pressed her palm to her chest, trying to steady herself. Get it together, Julian. He's your boss. Nothing more. But deep down she knew something had shifted. The next morning, Julian entered the office with fresh determination. She would survive this strange assignment. She would prove herself capable, even if it meant documenting every broken bulb and leaky faucet in the building. Yet the whispers had grown louder. Colleagues glanced her way with curiosity, some with amusement. Rumors spread quickly in places like this, and everyone seemed to know she had somehow caught the attention of Owen Harris. By midday, she was summoned again. Owen was standing by the window when she entered, this time the city skyline stretching behind him like a steel and glass painting. He didn't look at her at first. Your notes, he said. She handed him the clipboard. He flipped through it slowly, his eyes scanning her scrawled handwriting. At one point his brow lifted almost imperceptibly. You described the carpet in conference room 4 as... He paused. Smelling like a damp closet. Julian winced. I was being thorough. He looked up at her then, and she could have sworn there was the faintest gleam of humor in his eyes. Brutally thorough. She opened her mouth, unsure whether to apologize or defend herself. But Owen set the clipboard down before she could decide. Well done. Her heart stumbled. Well done. You notice things. He repeated almost to himself. More than most. Keep it up. For the briefest instant, his gaze softened, as though he were letting her see something beyond the steel. Then the moment was gone. You may go, he said, turning back to the window. Julian left the office, her thoughts swirling. She had expected humiliation, dismissal, and punishment. Instead, she stood on the edge of something she couldn't define, an invisible line between professional obligation and something dangerously more personal. And though she tried to shake it, one thought followed her down the corridor, echoing with every step. Owen Harris was not just watching her. He was testing her, and for reasons she could not begin to understand. She wanted to pass. The day of the investor showcase arrived with the kind of sharp electric tension that seemed to pulse through the walls of Harris Global. It wasn't just another corporate event. It was the first time investors, journalists, and analysts from across the city would be gathered in one space since Owen Harris's return to New York. Julian could feel it in the air when she stepped into the lobby. Colleagues rushed past her, voices, brisk steps quick. Sleek banners were draped across the walls, embossed with the Harris Global logo in silver. Rows of white chairs had been arranged in perfect lines. Servers passed with trays of champagne glasses, and somewhere faint music played from a hidden sound system. Julian smoothed her skirt and willed herself invisible. Her role that day was simple. Stand in the background. Make sure last-minute printouts were where they needed to be, and stay far, far away from Owen Harris. She had managed for the most part to avoid him since the strange silent game he seemed to be playing with her. Now and then, she caught his eye on her across the office, steady and unreadable, but he rarely summoned her, seldom spoke directly. It was as though he were content to watch her navigate like a scientist, observing an experiment. She wasn't sure if that made her feel safer or more exposed. "Gomez Rachel," her colleague murmured, as she passed carrying a stack of programs, trying not to trip in front of the investors. It would end up on social media in seconds. Julian rolled her eyes. "Thanks for the pep talk." But deep down, she feared Rachel wasn't wrong. Every day since that car incident seemed like a fresh opportunity for disaster. It happened faster than she could process. One of the reporters, a man in a dark suit with a microphone in hand and urgency written all over his face, stopped abruptly in front of her. "You work here, right?" he asked. Julian blinked. "Me, yes, I suppose." "Perfect. I need a quick comment about the piece I'm running. It won't take more than a minute." He gestured behind him where a camera operator was already adjusting his lens. Julian's stomach dropped. "Wait. I think you should," rolling the cameraman said. And then it was too late. The reporter leaned in with a brisk smile. "Your name?" "Julian," she stammered. "Julian Gomez. And Julian, what do you think of your new CEO, Owen Harris? What's it like working under him?" Her mind spun. She should have stopped the interview. She should have said she wasn't authorized. But with the camera lens fixed on her, her nerves snapped and words spilled out instead. "Well," she began hesitantly, "he's intense, mysterious, a little intimidating if I'm allowed to say that." The reporter nodded eagerly. "Go on." Julian tried to laugh, though it came out nervous. "But he also has a sense of humor you don't realize until you've already fallen for the joke." The cameraman's shoulders shook with muffled laughter. "And how do employees feel about him?" the reporter pressed. Julian swallowed, demanding absolutely. He demands more coffee than a cafe and more reports than an auditor. But the company feels different since he arrived. More alive, more unpredictable. The word surprised even her. Somewhere in the flood of her panic, she had spoken honestly. The reporter grinned. "Fantastic. Thank you, Julian." And before she could correct herself, he was gone. Microphone vanishing into the crowd. Julian stood frozen, her heart pounding, a knot of dread coiling in her chest. "What just happened?" she whispered to herself. She didn't have to wait long to find out. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. Colleagues huddled around phones and laptops, laughing at her words, replaying the clip. Comments flashed across the screen. "I also want a mysterious CEO, and she's hilarious. Let her host the company's channel." Julian wanted to crawl under her desk. Her inbox pinged with messages, playful, congratulatory, and downright mocking. And when Rachel appeared at her desk holding a tablet, eyes wide, Julian's stomach twisted. Rachel whispered that you're on the front page, showing her the headline, "Employee Reveals Secrets of Harris Global's Enigmatic CEO." Julian buried her face in her hands. "I'm going to be fired." "Or famous," Rachel countered with a grin. Julian groaned. "Same thing. Just a shorter notice." And then the phone rang. Rachel answered, her expression shifting in an instant. She covered the receiver with her hand, eyes darting toward Julian. "It's him. He wants to see you." Julian's blood ran cold. The walk to Owen's office felt like a death march. Her heels clicked against the polished floor. Each sound magnified, each step heavier. When she reached his door, her palms were damp, her throat dry. She knocked twice. "Come in." Owen sat behind his desk, a tablet in his hand. The infamous video paused on the screen. Her face, mid-sentence, stared back at her. Julian's breath caught. "Mr. Harris, I swear I didn't know it wasn't official. I thought it was just a casual question." Owen raised a hand, silencing her. His expression was unreadable. He replayed the video, the words echoing in the room. "He demands more coffee than a cafe, and more reports than an auditor, but also has a sense of humor." Julian winced. "I didn't mean," True, Owen said suddenly. Her eyes widened. "What true?" he repeated calmly. "I do demand more coffee than a cafe, and more reports than an auditor." He leaned back in his chair, eyes steady on hers. "And as for humor?" A pause, deliberate. "That remains to be seen." Julian stared, words failing her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked, his voice low. She swallowed. "Ruined everything." For 3 long seconds, silence filled the space. Then Owen sighed, setting the tablet aside. It was a success. Julian blinked. "Excuse me." The video went viral. Human. Unscripted. Investors are amused. Employees are energized. And the marketing team is drafting proposals. His gaze sharpened. "They want you in a few internal videos." Julian nearly choked. "Me, why me?" "Because you're spontaneous, approachable, and unpredictable." His lips curved, the faintest hint of a smile. Exactly what Harris Global needs. She could only stare, her heart thudding against her ribs. For a man who revealed so little, Owen Harris had just given her more than she could process. Not condemnation, not dismissal, but validation. And something else she couldn't quite name. The days that followed felt surreal. Julian walked through the office and found eyes turning toward her, not with pity, but with recognition. Someone asked her for an autograph on a napkin. Another jokingly requested a croissant review. Screenshots of her interview were pinned to bulletin boards with captions like, "More coffee than a cafe." Rachel teased mercilessly, but there was pride in her grin. "You're famous, Gomez. A legend already." Julian tried to laugh it off, but deep down, her nerves buzzed. Fame was one thing. Surviving Owen's scrutiny was another. And Owen did not make it easy. He summoned her more often now. Sometimes to review documents, sit quietly through meetings, sometimes for tasks that made no sense. She never knew if it was punishment, amusement, or something more complicated. But every time his eyes followed her, calm, steady, calculated, and beneath the marble-cold exterior, Julian began to see glimmers of something else, something that unsettled her more than his silence ever had. Interest. Genuine, unmistakable interest. During one of those long evenings, the office nearly empty, she lingered by his door with a folder in hand. He was working late, the glow of his desk lamp casting shadows across his features. His jacket was draped over the chair. His sleeves rolled to his elbows, and he looked less like the untouchable billionaire for the first time, and more like a man worn down by the weight of everything he carried. Julian hesitated, then knocked gently. He looked up, eyes meeting hers. "Your report," she said softly, stepping inside. He took it from her, their fingers brushing briefly. A spark ran through her, subtle but undeniable. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Then Owen cleared his throat, his composure sliding back into place. "Good work, Miss Gomez. You may go." But as she turned to leave, she caught the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, and it stayed with her long after she left the office and walked into the cool Manhattan night. Julian lay awake that evening, staring at the ceiling of her small Brooklyn apartment. The city hummed beyond her window, a lullaby of distant sirens and subway rumbles. She thought of the video, of the laughter, of the way Owen's eyes had softened just slightly when he called it a success. And she thought of that brief touch, the brush of fingers, the almost smile. For the first time since stepping into the wrong car, Julian realized something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. This was no longer just survival. This was something more, something beginning. The storm of attention that followed Julian's accidental interview hadn't fully calmed when Owen Harris began his next game. If the viral clip had elevated her from invisible assistant to an odd kind of office legend, his sudden focus on her only deepened the mystery. At first, she thought he might leave her alone again, fade back into the calm, silent rhythm of his CEO life. But Owen never did what she expected. It started on a Tuesday morning, crisp and gray, with a single message delivered to her desk. Miss Gomez, 10th floor. Oversee preparations. OH. Julian frowned at the note, the 3 stark sentences written in Owen's precise, almost mathematical handwriting. The 10th floor was rarely used except for investor gatherings and high-level meetings. She had no idea why he wanted her there, much less overseeing anything. Still, ignoring the CEO was not an option. By noon, she was standing in the center of the cavernous space, surrounded by workers, balancing on ladders, rolls of carpet half unfurled, and the faint smell of fresh paint. Someone handed her a clipboard. Someone else asked where to put the floral arrangements. Julian blinked. Right side near the windows. The florist nodded, satisfied. She exhaled. 1 decision down. 100 to go. That afternoon, she directed technicians, checked coffee machines, and even crouched under a table to fix tangled cables. By the time Owen arrived, calm, immaculate every inch, the untouchable billionaire Julian was streaked with dust and ink, her blouse stained from an unfortunate encounter with a leaky toner cartridge. He paused in the doorway, surveying the scene with his usual steady gaze. "You look battle-worn," he remarked. Julian pushed a curl from her forehead, glaring. "Some of us actually fight battles, Mr. Harris. Printers, extension cords, coffee machines with vendettas." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. He stepped closer, examining the rows of chairs, the adjusted lighting, the carefully placed arrangements. At last he gave a single nod. "Efficient." She stared at him. "Efficient. That's it. I nearly lost my life to a homicidal printer, and all I get is efficient." His eyes gleamed with faint amusement. "Would you prefer heroic?" Julian huffed, crossing her arms. "A little appreciation wouldn't kill you." Neither did the printer. Owen replied smoothly, already turning toward the door. And just like that, he was gone, leaving Julian fuming and oddly exhilarated. The subsequent trial came 2 days later. Julian was at her desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, when Rachel leaned over with wide eyes. "You're on his list again." Julian groaned. "What now?" Organizing his sock drawer. Alphabetizing his secrets. Rachel grinned. "Financial report. Annual. Missing sections. He wants you to review it." Julian nearly choked on her coffee. "Review the annual financial report. I'm not an accountant." But minutes later the file landed on her desk. Stacks of spreadsheets, figures, graphs. Her head spun just looking at it. "Why me?" she muttered under her breath. Still she worked. Hours blurred into each other as she traced inconsistencies, corrected misaligned charts, and even discovered a bizarre budget line for chocolate expenses. By evening her eyes burned, her back ached, and she was muttering about fiscal irresponsibility. That was when she sensed him. Owen stood beside her desk, silent, watching. Julian nearly jumped. "Do you habitually sneak up on people like a corporate ninja?" "Results," he said, holding out a hand. She passed the corrected file and is waiting for criticism. Instead, he skimmed her notes, then looked at her with something unreadable in his expression. "You caught what my finance managers missed," he said at last. "Well done." Julian blinked. "Did I actually do it right?" A pause. Then deliberately, "Better than right." Her heart skipped. He added that before she could speak. "You'll attend the next financial meeting. Quietly. Observe." Julian stared. "Me? In a finance meeting? With you?" "Yes." His voice was final. "I expect your report afterwards." And again, without further explanation, he walked away. Julian collapsed against her chair, dazed. She wanted to scream, laugh, or possibly faint. Instead, she whispered to herself, "What on earth is happening?" Weeks passed, and each day brought a new test. Sometimes it was mundane, evaluating office coffee, ensuring the Wi-Fi didn't crash before an investor call. Sometimes it was grueling, overseeing contractors compiling cross-department summaries. And sometimes it was humiliatingly absurd, like when she found herself elbow-deep in a jammed copy machine, Owen strolling by with the faintest smirk. He seemed to watch her closely each time, not just whether she succeeded, but how she fumbled, adapted, and laughed at herself in the face of chaos. At first, Julian thought he was punishing her. But slowly, she began to see the truth. He was testing her and measuring her resilience. Trusting her with cracks in the empire he never showed it to anyone else. And the strangest part, she was rising to meet it. One Friday evening, long after most of the office had emptied, Julian stayed behind, finishing yet another impossible task, coordinating logistics for a last-minute investor dinner. She was exhausted. Her blouse rumpled, her hair falling from its clip. The sound of footsteps made her glance up. Owen stood in the doorway, tie loosened, the faintest shadow of fatigue under his eyes. He looked less like the perfect CEO and more like a man who hadn't slept in days. "You're still here," he said quietly. Julian arched a brow. "Pot, meet kettle." For a long moment, silence hung between them. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, painting the office silver and gold. Then Owen stepped closer, placing a file on her desk. "Final check before tomorrow. I trust you." The word struck her harder than any compliment. "I trust you." These two simple words, spoken by Owen Harris, carry the weight of a rare gift. Julian's throat tightened. She nodded. "I won't let you down." For once, his expression softened just slightly. The mask of detachment slipped, and she glimpsed something fragile, almost human in his eyes. And then, as always, he turned away before she could say anything more. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her Brooklyn apartment, listening to the hum of the city beyond her window. Every test, every challenge, every impossible demand replayed in her mind. She had cursed him, laughed at him, raged against him. But through it all, she had grown stronger, sharper, more confident. And Owen, he was still a mystery. Cold, calculated, elusive. But in stolen glances, in fleeting, almost smiles, in the weight of his words, she saw something shifting, something he didn't want to admit. And maybe she didn't either. By Monday morning, whispers filled the office again. Rumors that Julian was now Owen Harris's right hand. He relied on her, trusted her, and even confided in her. Rachel cornered her at the coffee machine. "You realize you're in over your head. He doesn't do this. He doesn't pull assistants into boardrooms. He doesn't test people." Julian tried to brush it off, but Rachel's words echoed in her chest. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was part of his world, whether she was ready or not. And deep down, she knew the tests were only beginning. The invitation arrived on embossed ivory cardstock, tucked neatly into a black envelope bearing the silver seal of Harris Global. It looked like something designed not just to announce an event, but to intimidate those who received it. Julian turned the envelope in her hands 3 times before opening it. Inside the words were simple, elegant, merciless. Miss Gomez, your attendance at the Harris Global Investors Gala is required. Formal attire, 8:00 p.m. OH. Her stomach flipped. Required. Not invited. Required. She stormed into Rachel's cubicle, waving the card like a weapon. Tell me I'm hallucinating. Rachel glanced at it, then whistled. The gala. That's like Wall Street's equivalent of the Met Gala, and he wants you there. Julian collapsed into the spare chair. Wants me. More like drafted me. This isn't a choice. It's a sentence. Rachel leaned forward, eyes sparkling. Or it's an opportunity. Julian groaned. An opportunity to trip on marble floors and humiliate myself in front of every investor in Manhattan. Or Rachel countered, an opportunity to walk into that ballroom on the arm of Owen Harris. Julian froze. What? Rachel grinned. You think he asked you there for fun? Trust me. He has a reason. Something strategic. But still, it means he chose you. Julian buried her face in her hands. I'm going to die. Elegantly dressed but still dead. The night of the gala arrived with a chill wind sweeping across Manhattan. The venue was an opulent hotel near Central Park, its entrance glowing with golden light. Chauffeured cars lined the curb, spilling out women in glittering gowns, and men in tuxedos as photographers' flashes sparked like lightning. Julian's cab ride ended a block away. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, her breath fogging in the cold, staring at the glittering facade. Her dress clung to her frame in deep burgundy satin, elegant but not ostentatious. She had chosen it after an hour-long debate with Rachel, who swore the color made her look dangerous and irresistible. Her curls framed her face, her lips painted bolder than she usually dared. She felt like an imposter. Just breathe, she whispered, stepping forward into the guests' current. Inside the ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and gilded mirrors. A string quartet played softly from the corner, while servers glided with trays of champagne. Every surface gleamed, every voice carried with the confidence of wealth. And then she saw him. Owen Harris. Dark gray suit perfectly tailored his presence like gravity itself. Conversations shifted as he moved through the crowd, people leaning instinctively closer, eager for a word, a glance, any fragment of his attention. When his eyes found hers, the room's chaos seemed to dim. He crossed the marble floor deliberately, his gaze steady, unflinching. Miss Gomez, he said, offering his arm right on time. Her heart stuttered. She slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, her fingers brushing the cool fabric of his sleeve. I got here 15 minutes early, she admitted. Walked around the block twice. His lips curved just slightly. Nervous strategy. Survival strategy, she muttered. Together they stepped into the current of the gala. The first challenge came swiftly. Thomas Darling. The voice was low-honeyed, laced with possessive familiarity. A woman appeared in a cascade of red silk perfume trailing like smoke. Her smile was sharp, feline, practiced. Delaney Owen said smoothly, inclining his head. Julian instantly recognized the name, one of the most powerful investors on the East Coast, rumored to have impeccable instincts and a relentless personal interest in Owen Harris. And who, Delaney purred, turning her gaze to Julian with a slow, assessing sweep. Might this be? Owen's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Julian's arm. This is Julian Gomez, he said evenly, my special assistant for integration affairs. Julian forced a smile, extending her hand. Pleasure to meet you. Delaney's eyes narrowed, but she shook Julian's hand with delicate disdain. How interesting. Have you been working together long? Since the $12 donut, Julian blurted, then immediately regretted it. Delaney blinked, I beg your pardon. Owen cleared his throat, hiding what might have been a cough or a laugh. Miss Gomez has an unusual sense of humor. Julian bit her lip cheeks burning, but when Owen glanced down at her, there was a glint of mischief in his eyes, as though he'd enjoyed the slip. The rest of the evening unfolded like a high-stakes game. Every time Delaney leaned too close, Julian intervened, asking Owen about a report, insisting the manager needed him, even once, pretending to spill champagne to draw him away. Owen played along his composure, never faltering, but he gave her the briefest flicker of approval in his gaze each time. By the time dessert was served, Delaney's patience had worn thin. She excused herself with icy politeness, her perfume lingering like smoke. Owen exhaled quietly, leaning closer to Julian. You were perfect. Julian laughed under her breath. I'm an improvisation machine, but I'm charging for this one. A whole week without surprise assignments, negotiable with pastries. He glanced at her eyes gleaming with something dangerously close to amusement. You're pushing your luck. They both laughed softly, the sound lost in the hum of the ballroom. Later, when the evening finally drew close, Owen walked her to the curb where the night air was crisp against her skin. The city sparkled beyond the park, the rhythm of traffic a distant hum. They stood in silence for a moment, the world hushed around them. Thank you, Julian, Owen said at last, his voice lower, quieter than she had ever heard it. Tonight could have been difficult. You made it manageable. She looked up at him, her heart beating unevenly. It wasn't just me. You held your own. His gaze lingered on her unreadable steady. And then he said words that tangled her breath. You looked dangerous tonight. Julian froze. The way he said it wasn't about the dress, the evening, or the role she had played. It was about her. She had stepped into his world and turned it upside down. She found her voice barely. And you almost looked human. For the first time, his laugh came easily soft and unguarded. Good night, Miss Gomez, he said, opening the car door for her. Good night, Mr. Harris, she whispered, slipping inside. As the car pulled away, Julian pressed her hands to her lap, her pulse a wild drumbeat. She should have been relieved that the evening was over, but instead, she felt as though something had only just begun. That night, lying awake in her Brooklyn apartment, Julian replayed the gala repeatedly. The weight of Owen's arm beneath her hand, the spark in his eyes, when she improvised the low timbre of his voice, when he called her dangerous. It was reckless, impossible, and yet she couldn't stop the quiet smile that tugged at her lips. Something unspoken had taken root between mismatched socks and marble ballrooms, printer battles, and viral interviews. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew she was already caught in it. The Monday after the gala dawned, with pale winter lights spilling across Manhattan, soft and almost forgiving. But inside the offices of Harris Global, the air carried a new tension. Julian felt it the moment she stepped into the building. Conversations hushed when Owen Harris passed. The air seemed heavier, the silence sharper. And for her, the difference was undeniable. He didn't look at her, not once. Where his gaze had lingered days before, deliberate and unsettling, it slid past her as if she were invisible. Emails arrived in her inbox, crisp and curt, devoid of the faint undercurrents she had begun to recognize. Meetings came and went without her summons. When she finally crossed his path in the hallway, his greeting was formal and distant, like two strangers forced to share the same air. Good morning, Miss Gomez. That was all. Her chest tightened at the memory of his words from the gala. You looked dangerous tonight. Had it been nothing more than a moment. A slip, a fleeting crack in the armor he now regretted. Julian tried to focus on her work. She buried herself in spreadsheets, memos, and endless administrative details. But her mind drifted back to how he had laughed unguarded in the cool night air, to the softness in his voice when he thanked her. Now that man was gone, replaced by marble. By midweek, Rachel noticed. "You've been staring at the same cell in that spreadsheet for 15 minutes, her colleague whispered, leaning across the desk. "What's wrong with you?" Julian shook herself, blinking hard. "Nothing. I'm fine." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "This is about him." Julian bristled. "It's about work." "Uh-huh." Rachel folded her arms. "So the CEO suddenly goes cold and starts sending you robotic emails, and you look like someone kicked your puppy totally about work." Julian pressed her lips together, unwilling to admit it out loud. But Rachel's words struck home. Because it hurt, more than it should. 2 days later, the hurt crystallized into something sharper. Julian delivered a report to Owen's office, knocking lightly before stepping inside. He was seated at his desk, his navy suit immaculate, his eyes fixed on his laptop. He didn't rise. He didn't even glance up at her. She said, "I brought your requested project summary," forcing professionalism into her tone. "Leave it there," he replied, his voice low, clipped. She set the folder on the edge of his desk, waiting for him to say something more, for even the slightest acknowledgement of her presence. But the silence stretched cold and deliberate. Her pulse pounded. She took a breath. "Mr. Harris." At that, he did look up, but the gaze that had once unnerved her with its intensity now cut in a different way, detached, formal, as if the connection between them had never existed. "Yes, Miss Gomez." The title stung more than she expected. She swallowed hard. "Nothing. Good afternoon." And she left before her voice could betray her. That evening, back in her Brooklyn apartment, Julian sat by the window watching the city lights blur against the glass. Her reflection looked pale, tired, and confused. She replayed everything in her mind. The wrong car, the viral video, the impossible tasks, the gala. Each memory shimmered with threads that tied them together, threads that had begun to feel like fate. Now it felt as though Owen himself were cutting each one deliberately, precisely, until there was nothing left. She told herself it didn't matter. He was her boss, a billionaire, untouchable. Whatever had flickered between them was never meant to last. But the ache in her chest told a different story. On Friday morning, the ache deepened. An envelope appeared on her desk, its handwriting unmistakable. Owen's precise, deliberate, slanted with restrained elegance. She hesitated before opening it, bracing herself. Inside was a single page. "Julian, if I seem distant, it is because I am trying to protect what remains of my rationality. You have a way of dismantling it with your presence, with your words, with the reckless honesty you carry. You make me laugh when I should not laugh. You remind me that people are human when I have spent years convincing myself otherwise. But I am the kind of man who ruins what he touches. And you deserve everything light, everything I cannot yet be. O.H." Julian stared at the words until they blurred. Her chest felt hollow, carved open by contradictions. He admitted the distance. He acknowledged the effect she had on him. And still he pushed her away. Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced them back. She folded the letter, carefully tucking it into her bag, like something too dangerous to leave exposed. Then she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked back into the office with robotic efficiency. If Owen Harris wanted distance, she would give it, at least on the surface. The following days passed in muted rhythm. Julian precisely met her deadlines, answered emails with flawless punctuation, and buried herself in tasks. To her colleagues, she looked like a model of discipline. Inside, she was unraveling. Her heart clenched at his polite nod as she passed him in the corridor. Each time she heard his voice in a meeting, low, steady, impersonal. It felt like a blade sliding between her ribs. But she did not falter. She would not let him see her falter. If he could be marble, so could she. As she gathered her things one evening, Rachel appeared at her desk with a raised brow. "You're awfully quiet these days." "I have work," Julian replied flatly. Rachel studied her for a long moment, then softened. "You know, cold doesn't mean anything. Sometimes it means too much." Julian forced a laugh, brittle. "Or sometimes it just means cold." But Rachel's words lingered long after she left the building. That night, Julian dreamed of the gala, the chandeliers, the champagne, Owen's voice calling her dangerous. But in the dream, when she turned to look at him, his chair was empty, his presence gone. She woke with tears on her cheeks. The following Monday, the office buzzed about the upcoming investor dinner. Julian kept her head down, typing reports, pretending not to listen. But when her desk phone rang, her breath caught. She lifted the receiver. Julian Gomez. A pause. Then his voice was unmistakably calm and firm. "Miss Gomez, my office, now." Her hand trembled as she set the phone down. He had been a ghost for days, a shadow of marble walls between them. And now this. She stood slowly, smoothed her skirt, and walked down the corridor with steps that felt both heavy and inevitable. When she reached his office, the door was ajar. She knocked once. "Come in." He was standing by the window as always, hands in his pockets. The skyline stretched behind him. He turned when she entered, his gaze steady, but less guarded than it had been all week. "Mr. Harris," she began, forcing formality. "Julian," he interrupted softly. The sound of her name in his voice nearly undid her. Silence stretched heavy and fragile. Finally he spoke. "I did not intend for distance to become absence." Her breath caught. She said nothing, afraid that if she spoke, her voice would break. Owen's eyes held hers, gray and unwavering. "Pushing you away would keep things simple, safe. But it hasn't. It's only made the chaos louder." Julian swallowed hard. "Then why do it?" His jaw tightened. "Because I don't trust myself, and I refuse to drag you into a world that consumes everything." Her heart pounded, torn between anger and longing. She took a step closer before she could stop herself. "You don't get to decide that for me." The words hung in the air, sharp, defiant. Owen's expression flickered momentarily. Surprise, then something darker, rawer. But he said nothing. And Julian, trembling, turned on her heel before her resolve could break. She walked out of his office, her pulse wild, her chest aching, her mind spinning with the truth she could no longer ignore. She was already in his world, and she wasn't sure she wanted to leave. The announcement came on a Thursday morning, delivered in the clipped, efficient tone of Owen Harris's assistant. "Mandatory attendance," she told the staff crisply. Friday evening, recognition night, auditorium. Groans rippled through the office. Recognition night was an annual event, an obligatory celebration where employees endured endless speeches, polite applause, and awkward finger foods. Few looked forward to it. But the thought of sitting through 2 hours in the same room as Owen Harris, still icy, still distant, felt like torture for Julian. She told herself she would sit quietly in the back, clap when expected, and leave unnoticed, invisible. Yet fate, as always, had other plans. The auditorium shimmered with polished wood and spotlighted banners, the Harris Global logo glowing from the stage. Rows of chairs filled quickly, employees murmuring in hushed anticipation. Julian slipped into a seat near the back, clutching her program, her stomach in knots. She hadn't spoken to Owen since their last confrontation, when her own words had escaped her. "You don't get to decide that for me." Even now, the memory sent heat rushing to her cheeks. He had said nothing then, nothing afterwards. His silence had stretched like an ocean between them. Tonight she promised herself she would not look at him. She would not let her heart betray her. The lights dimmed, the murmurs ceased, and Owen Harris walked onto the stage. He was immaculate as ever, his suit dark, his presence commanding. The room seemed to shift toward him, pulled by an invisible gravity. "Good evening," he began, his voice carrying with quiet authority. "Tonight we honor not only performance, but the spirit that drives Harris Global forward. Precision, discipline, and above all, authenticity." Julian forced herself to look down at the program in her lap, tracing the printed letters, anything to avoid the risk of catching his eyes. But when he paused, when the silence stretched, curiosity betrayed her. She glanced up, and his gaze was fixed on her. Her breath caught. Owen continued smoothly addressing the audience, but his eyes never left hers. "Authenticity," he repeated, "a rare quality, one that cannot be taught. It is honesty, even when inconvenient, courage, even when unpolished. It is the ability to remind us that beneath numbers and charts, we are people first." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Julian's pulse thundered in her ears. And then, without warning, her name. "Tonight," Owen said, his voice deliberate, resonant. "I want to recognize Julian Gomez." The air left her lungs. Applause erupted around her. Rachel shoved at her shoulder with gleeful urgency. "Go!" Julian shook her head furiously. "No, no, I can't." But the spotlight swung blinding in its sudden heat, illuminating her where she sat frozen. "Miss Gomez," Owen prompted gently, his tone laced with command. "Please join me." Her legs felt wooden as she rose. The aisle stretched endlessly, every eye in the room trained on her. She willed her body forward step by step until she finally climbed the stage. Owen extended his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. His grip was warm, steady, grounding. Facing the audience, she tried to summon words, but her mind was blank, her throat dry. "Say something," Owen murmured low enough for only her to hear. Her heart hammered. She turned to the crowd, voice trembling at first, but growing steadier. She said softly that I never thought a mistake could lead me here. But sometimes the wrong turn puts you on the right path. Sometimes you get into the wrong car and find the right destination. Laughter, gentle and warm, rippled through the room. Applause swelled. Owen's expression softened, almost surprised. He allowed the faintest smile in full view of everyone for the first time. Julian handed the microphone back, quickly retreating before she could crumble. But fate struck again. Her heel caught on the edge of the step. She stumbled forward, hands flailing, and collided with a decorative plant. The pot toppled with a crash, shards scattering across the stage. The room went silent. Julian knelt amid the wreckage, face blazing with mortification. It was a fake plant, she blurted, voice strangled. Laughter exploded, rolling through the auditorium like thunder. And then Owen was there, reaching down to lift her gently by the arm. His lips curved in genuine amusement, his laugh low, unguarded. "You have a unique talent for making an impact," he murmured. Julian wanted to disappear, but the warmth of his hand steadied her. They walked off the stage together, applause still echoing. Later, in the quiet hum of the reception that followed, Julian stood at the edge of the room, nursing a glass of sparkling water, cheeks still hot from embarrassment. Rachel appeared at her side, eyes alight. "You were brilliant. Legendary. That was the most memorable recognition night this company has ever had." Julian groaned. "I tripped over a fake plant." "And owned it," Rachel countered. Even Owen laughed. Did you see him? Actually laughed. You're unstoppable. Julian shook her head, but her heart betrayed her with a flutter. Across the room, Owen stood in conversation with two directors, but his eyes found hers again. He excused himself smoothly and crossed the floor. Her pulse quickened as he stopped before her. Miss Gomez, he said evenly, though his eyes held a glimmer of mischief. Thank you for your contribution to the evening. Julian winced. I'll never live it down. On the contrary, he said, lowering his voice, you've made yourself unforgettable. The words curled around her, soft and dangerous. Before she could respond, another executive approached, drawing Owen away. But the echo of his voice lingered warm against the cool air of the ballroom. Unforgettable. As Julian returned to her apartment that night, exhaustion weighed on her body, but her mind raced. For days he had been distant, cold, untouchable. And now, before the entire company, he had pulled her into the spotlight, named her, praised her not for obedience or efficiency, but for authenticity, for herself. Her chest tightened with something equal parts relief and longing. Maybe she thought the distance was ending. Maybe. The next morning, whispers swept the office like wildfire. Photos from recognition night had already spread. Julian on stage laughing awkwardly, Owen steadying her by the arm, the two of them sharing a glance that seemed too intimate for mere colleagues. Rachel plopped into the chair beside her desk, phone in hand. You're officially a legend. Again. Headlines: the CEO and the assistant who stole the show. Julian groaned, burying her face in her hands. This is a nightmare. It's a fairy tale, Rachel corrected. Julian shook her head. Fairy tales don't involve broken flower pots. But even as she protested, her heart whispered otherwise. Because somewhere between the laughter and the applause, between the stumble and his steady hand, something had shifted. Owen Harris was no longer only the man who had pushed her away. He was the man who had just chosen to bring her back. The Monday after recognition night began like any other. The sky over Manhattan was a dull gray sheet streaked with drizzle that blurred the tops of the skyscrapers. Inside Harris Global, however, the energy was electric. People still whispered about the event, Julian's stumble, the laughter that had broken the usual formality, Owen Harris's rare smile. But beneath the chatter, something else stirred a current of unease. Julian noticed it first in the hushed tones of two security guards by the reception desk. He looks different today. Less cold, one muttered. More lethal. She frowned, brushing past them toward the elevator. On her floor, Rachel pounced with wide eyes. You won't believe this, Rachel whispered, leaning close. Thomas. Sorry, Owen is sick. Julian blinked. Sick, as in, actually ill? Rachel nodded dramatically. Walked in this morning with a tissue, refused coffee, barely spoke to the CFO. Something's seriously wrong. Julian nearly laughed. The idea of Owen Harris, the untouchable titan of finance, being undone by something as ordinary as a cold was absurd. Yet as the day dragged on, she noticed it herself. He skipped 2 meetings. His glass-walled office remained shuttered. And when he did emerge briefly, his stride lacked its usual precision, his jaw tight as though concealing weakness. The sight unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. By noon, Julian's curiosity outweighed her caution. She slipped downstairs to the cafe in the lobby, ordering ginger tea with lemon and honey chamomile sachets, and because she couldn't help herself, a bowl of chicken soup. The barista looked at her oddly as she piled everything into a paper bag. When she returned to her desk, Rachel raised a brow. Planning a picnic. Julian ignored her, muttering emergency care package. 10 minutes later, she stood outside Owen's office, bag in hand. She knocked twice. Come in, came his voice, raspy, lower than usual. She stepped inside and froze. Owen sat at his desk, shoulders hunched slightly, tie-loosened jacket draped carelessly over the chair. A crumpled tissue lay discarded beside his laptop. His usually sharp eyes were rimmed with red, and though his expression remained composed, he looked human. Almost painfully so. "Wow," she whispered before she could stop herself. "You look almost human." His gaze lifted faintly amused, despite the fatigue. "I'm fine. Just a slight atmospheric imbalance." "You mean a fever?" He coughed lightly. "I have focus and strategic congestion." Julian set the bag on his desk. "You have the flu, Mr. Harris, and if you keep pretending otherwise, you'll collapse in the middle of an investor call. Then HR will blame me for watching it happen." His brow arched. "And what is this basic care?" She pulled out the tea, the soup, and the vitamin C bar. "You'll drink, eat, and stop pretending you can conquer viruses with spreadsheets." He stared momentarily at the assortment, as though she had placed a foreign object before him. Then reluctantly, he reached for the tea. The first sip made him grimace. "This is terrible." "Which means it's working," she shot back. Silence stretched heavy but not uncomfortable. His eyes lingered on her softer now, stripped of their usual calculation. "Thank you," he murmured at last, so quietly she almost missed it. Julian's chest tightened. "You're welcome." The afternoon unfolded in an unexpected rhythm. Julian checked in on him every hour, bringing fresh tea and ensuring he ate the soup. At one point, she even placed a thermometer on his desk. He glared at it, as if it were a hostile adversary, but eventually humored her. "You're impossible," he muttered, when she scolded him for trying to work through a coughing fit. "And you're stubborn," she retorted, adjusting the blinds to dim the sunlight. "So we're even." By early evening, he looked fractionally better, though still pale, his voice hoarse. As she gathered the empty soup container, he leaned back in his chair with a faint, almost weary smile. "You didn't have to do this." Julian hesitated, then said softly, "I know, but you would have done it for me, in your own weird way. Coffee instead of tea, spreadsheets instead of soup. But still." Their eyes met, and for a moment the air shifted. The distance that had haunted them for weeks dissolved, leaving only the quiet thrum of something unspoken. Owen looked away first, reaching for a tissue. "Go home, Julian, before you catch whatever this is." She lingered a second longer before nodding, "Only if you promise to rest." "Negotiable." She rolled her eyes and left, though her heart was still tangled in the room behind her. The next morning, she arrived early, only to find a small box on her desk. Inside lay a chocolate bar and a keychain shaped like a penguin clutching a hockey stick. A note rested beneath it, written in his precise hand. "I disappeared for the day as ordered. Don't think you've won. I'm only recharging for the next challenge. O.H." Julian laughed out loud, startling the few early arrivals. Rachel peeked over her shoulder, eyes widening. A penguin keychain. He remembered. Julian nodded, fingers tracing the tiny figure from the car. "The day I thought he was my Uber." Rachel let out a low whistle. "He remembers everything." Julian tucked the keychain carefully into her bag, her smile lingering long after. The rest of the week felt strangely different. Not easier exactly. Owen was still Owen, his expectations relentless, his tasks unpredictable. But the ice had cracked. Where once there had been only distance, there was something else, subtle but unmistakable warmth. He didn't mention his illness again. He didn't thank her twice. But his gaze softened when it landed on her. His tone shifted when he spoke her name. And in those small changes, Julian felt something far more dangerous than hostility. Connection. That Friday, she left the office with the keychain in her pocket, and the knowledge that something irreversible had happened. Owen Harris had let her see him human, and she, against all logic and caution, had begun to fall. The end-of-year holiday party at Harris Global was infamous. It had a reputation for excess lavish decorations, champagne fountains, music that stretched late into the night. For some employees, it was a highlight of the calendar. For others, it was a trap of awkward encounters and regrettable dance floor decisions. For Julian, it was a test. She stood before the mirror in the office restroom, smoothing the folds of her emerald dress, adjusting the line of her red lipstick. Rachel leaned against the sink nearby, grinning. "You look stunning," Rachel said. "Thomas Miller won't know what hit him." Julian rolled her eyes. "His name is Owen Harris, and I didn't get dressed up for him. This is strictly professional." Rachel smirked. "Sure. Professional. That's why you chose lipstick the color of temptation and heels that could kill a man." Julian flushed, turning away. "I want to get through this night without tripping, spilling, or humiliating myself. That's the goal." "Then you'd better stay off the dance floor," Rachel teased. Julian shot her a look. Exactly. The ballroom was transformed into something out of a winter fairy tale. Icicle lights draped from the ceiling, casting a silver glow across polished floors. A string quartet played carols in one corner, while servers circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Employees milled about in tuxedos and gowns, their laughter bright against the hum of the city beyond the windows. Julian stepped inside, trying to appear casual, her pulse racing. She scanned the crowd, hoping to slip into the background. But then she saw him. Owen Harris. He was standing near the indoor garden. No tie tonight, his dark suit tailored to perfection, his presence commanding as ever. Yet there was something different, something looser, more dangerous, in how he carried himself outside the strict confines of boardrooms and investor meetings. And when his eyes found hers, the room seemed to shrink. Julian froze, every nerve alive. He moved through the crowd with deliberate ease, conversations parting around him, until he stopped directly in front of her. "Miss Gomez," he said, his voice low, steady. "Mr. Harris," she replied, praying her tone sounded calm. His gaze swept over her, once deliberate, unreadable. Then his lips curved slightly. "You look beautiful." Her breath caught. "You don't look half dead anymore. That's progress." The faintest gleam of amusement flickered in his eyes. "Thanks to your tea, which tasted like poison." Julian laughed softly, the sound easing the tension between them. For a moment, it felt almost normal, almost safe. Then the music shifted. The quartet gave way to a slower melody, one meant for dancing. The floor cleared as couples began to step into rhythm. Julian's heart thudded. "I don't dance." "I don't usually either," Owen said. Then he extended his hand. "But tonight is an exception." She stared at his hand, at the quiet certainty in his eyes. Her pulse screamed no, but her fingers betrayed her sliding into his. The moment his hand closed around hers, the world narrowed. He led her gently to the center of the floor, his other hand settling against the curve of her back. Steady, assured. Julian's nerves rioted. "Fair warning. I'm not responsible for broken bones if I step on your foot." "Noted," he murmured, drawing her closer. They began to move slow and deliberate, the music carrying them. At first, her steps were awkward and stiff, but Owen's presence was grounding. He guided with subtle precision, his touch firm but not demanding. Within moments, she found herself falling into rhythm. The room faded, the chatter, the clinking glasses, even the curious stares from colleagues. All that remained was the press of his hand, the steady gray of his eyes. "You're staring?" she whispered, nerves tightening. Yes, he said. Her cheeks burned. Why? Because you've managed to disarm me, he admitted quietly. And I don't often allow that. Her breath faltered. That sounds dangerous. His lips curved faintly. You make danger look like salvation. The words slid into her searing, leaving her unsteady. She looked away, desperate to hide the rush of emotion. But Owen tilted her chin gently, forcing her gaze back to his. Julian. He said her name like a vow on his lips. She felt its weight, depth, and restraint. And she knew whatever this was, it was no longer deniable. When the music ended, applause rippled softly across the room. Julian pulled back quickly, her breath uneven, her heart pounding. Whispers swirled. She could feel eyes on them, the curious speculative stares of colleagues and executives. She stepped away, flustered. I should get some air, she murmured. Owen didn't stop her, but his gaze followed as she slipped out into the crisp night air of the terrace. Outside, the city stretched beneath her lights, glittering like a million secrets. Julian braced her hands on the railing, sucking in the cold air, willing her heart to slow. This couldn't happen. Not here, not with him. And yet her body still hummed with the memory of his touch. Her skin still burned with his words. The sound of footsteps reached her. She turned. Owen stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, the glow of the ballroom spilling behind him. You ran, he said softly. I needed air, she corrected. He stepped closer, the night wind tugging at his hair, loosening the careful lines of his perfection. You're afraid. Julian's throat tightened. Of what? His gaze was steady. Of me. Of us. Her pulse thudded painfully. Because it doesn't make sense. You're... She broke off, gesturing helplessly. You. And I'm just... Julian Gomez. He interrupted firmly. She froze. The woman who makes my empire feel human, he said quietly. The woman who reminds me that I'm not marble, that I bleed, that I laugh. Tears pricked her eyes unbidden. Owen. He closed the distance, his hand brushing against hers on the railing. The contact was slight, fleeting, but it jolts her entire body. We don't have to decide what this is tonight, he said, voice low, rougher than she'd ever heard it. But I can't keep pretending it isn't real. Julian's breath caught. The night seemed to hold its own silence, the city fading, the world narrowing to just them. And for the first time, she didn't pull away. When she finally returned to the ballroom, Rachel intercepted her immediately, eyes gleaming. Oh my God, you and him on the dance floor. Do you realize what people are saying? Julian forced a shaky laugh. Let them talk. But deep down, she knew the truth. The holiday dance wasn't just gossip fodder. It was the moment the line between them had shifted irrevocably. Snow had begun to fall over Manhattan, soft flakes drifting through the night air, dusting the sidewalks in silver. It was late, long after most of the city had surrendered to sleep, but Julian couldn't rest. She sat at her small kitchen table in Brooklyn, nursing a cup of cold tea, staring at the city lights beyond her window. The memory of the holiday party haunted her, the music, the way Owen's hand had guided hers across the dance floor, the quiet weight of his words on the terrace. I can't keep pretending it isn't real. She had replayed it 100 times, and still her heart refused to steady. She told herself it was impossible. He was a billionaire CEO. She was an assistant who had stumbled into his car by mistake. Fairy tales like that didn't exist, not in the real world. And yet, the warmth of his eyes, the softness beneath the steel, the way he had let her see him human, those things were real. And no matter how much she tried to deny it, the truth lingered stubborn as the snow. The next morning, she walked into Harris Global with a knot in her stomach. The office buzzed with the usual end-of-year chaos, but whispers trailed after her wherever she went. They danced. He smiled at her. Did you see them together? Julian kept her head down, cheeks burning. But the rumors weren't the worst part. The worst part was Owen's silence. All day she saw him only from a distance, moving through meetings, shaking hands with investors, his expression perfectly composed. Not a glance, not a word. By evening, she convinced herself the holiday dance had meant nothing. A slip. A moment he would bury along with all the others. She was gathering her things when her desk phone rang. Miss Gomez came with the familiar calm of his assistant. Mr. Harris would like to see you in his office. Now. Julian's heart stuttered. She rose slowly, smoothed her blouse, and walked down the corridor with unsteady steps. The door was slightly ajar. She knocked once. Come in. Owen stood by the window as he often did, the city sprawling behind him like a kingdom he commanded. But tonight, his posture was different, tense, as though even he didn't know what he was about to do. Mr. Harris, she began, her voice careful. He turned. His eyes found hers, instantly steady, unreadable. Julian. He said her name soft on his lips. Silence stretched. The hum of the city filled the space between them. Finally he spoke. Do you know why I asked you here? She shook her head, her pulse thundering. He crossed the room slowly, stopping only a breath away. Because I'm tired of distance. Tired of silence. Tired of pretending that what I feel for you is anything less than dangerous. Julian froze. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Owen. I tried to fight it. He continued, his voice low, rawer than she'd ever heard. I told myself it was reckless and would ruin you. That would destroy me. But every time you walk into this room, speak without fear, and look at me as if I'm more than a title. He broke off, his jaw tight. You undo me. Her breath caught. You don't mean that. His eyes burned into hers. I've never meant anything more. The world tilted. Julian's throat tightened with emotions she had buried for weeks. This isn't safe, she whispered. No, he agreed, his hand lifting to brush against hers. It isn't. But nothing worth having ever is. The touch was slight, fleeting, but it ignited something in her chest, something undeniable. Owen. She breathed, her resolve crumbling. His lips curved faintly, almost pained. Repeat my name. Owen. And in that single word, something broke whatever barrier he had built between them, whatever distance he had tried to keep. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers, his voice barely a whisper. Julian, I'm asking, you don't run from this. Please don't run from me. Her eyes closed, tears pricking. She wanted to run. She wanted to stay. She wanted everything and feared it all. But when she opened her eyes, the truth spilled out before she could stop it. I don't want to run. His breath hitched. And then at last he kissed her. It wasn't the kind of kiss born of hesitation. It was fire, meeting fire, restraint unraveling. His hand cupped her jaw. Hers clutched at his lapel, and the world disappeared for one wild, dizzy moment. There was no empire titles wrong, cars or viral interviews. Only Owen and Julian, two people colliding in a storm they could no longer resist. When they finally broke apart, her chest heaved, her lips trembling. Owen's eyes searched hers, fierce and tender all at once. I've spent years mastering control. And you are the one thing I cannot control. Julian laughed shakily, tears slipping free. I never asked you to. He smiled then, a genuine smile, rare and breathtaking. Good, because I'm done fighting. They stood silently, the city glittering beyond the glass, the weight of everything unspoken, finally breaking into light. Julian felt it in her bones. This was not an ending. It was the beginning of something terrifying, fragile, extraordinary. And as Owen's arms wrapped around her steady and sure, she knew she wasn't afraid anymore. Hours later, lying awake in her apartment, Julian replayed every moment, her heart still racing. She knew tomorrow would bring whispers, complications, risks she couldn't yet name. But for now, for tonight, she let herself believe. Sometimes the wrong car can take you exactly where you're meant to be. And if you've been with Julian and Owen throughout this journey, share your feelings with us. What did you think about the moment Owen finally confessed his love? Leave a comment so we can talk about it together. Hit like if you felt your heart race, just like Julian's. And don't forget to follow so you won't miss the next unexpected turns in their love story.